It is just after 3 in the morning in the center of Damascus, and the square is already full. They have built the gallows in the open, in the middle of the city, in a place where ordinary people buy bread and catch buses in the daylight. Marge Square, Marja. The lamps are still on. There are soldiers, and there are men in suits, and there are thousands of ordinary people who were told to come and watch, and they did come. Because in this country, in this year, you do not ignore an invitation like that. A man is brought out. His hands are bound. Over his white prison clothes they have draped a sheet of paper, a printed sheet, and on it is written the sentence of the court, in Arabic, for everyone to read. They put the rope around his neck. He is allowed to say a prayer. He speaks a few quiet words, and then, in front of the cameras, in front of the crowd, in front of a state television service that will broadcast the body to the entire Arab world for hours afterward, he is hanged. He hangs there as the sun comes up. They leave him. For 6 hours they leave him, so that the photographers can work, so that the lesson is complete. And the strange thing, the thing the file keeps returning to, is that the men who killed him this morning had, only weeks before, considered making him a minister of their own government. They had eaten at his table. They had trusted him with their secrets. One of them had called him a friend. So who was the man on the rope? And how did he get so close to the heart of an enemy state that they almost handed him the keys? You're listening to the Betrayal Files. The folder is thin for what is inside it. Case file number 4. Declassified, in pieces, over 60 years. By Israeli military intelligence, by Mossad, by the slow leak of memoirs and court records, and the testimony of men who were there. Parts of it are still sealed. The operational cables, the names of the people who ran him, the full list of what he sent and to whom, and what was done with it. The country is Syria in the early 1960s, a young, unstable republic lurching from coup to coup, sharing a tense border with a state it had sworn to destroy. The agency is Israel's. The era is the years between the wars, when the next war was already being planned on both sides of the wire. The name on the folder is Eli Cohen. In Damascus they knew him by another name, Kamel Amin Thaabet, a rich Syrian, a patriot, a friend of generals. That man never existed, and the man who wore him died for it. He was born on the 26th of December, 1924, in Alexandria, the great port city on the Egyptian coast, where the sea is loud and the streets carry a dozen languages at once. His family were Syrian Jews. They had come from Aleppo, that ancient city in the north of Syria, generations before, and they had kept the old world inside the house, the Arabic, the prayers, the food, the memory of streets they had left behind. His father, Shaul, ran a small business selling ties and silk. His mother, Sophie, kept a religious home. Eli was one of 8 children, and from the beginning he was the clever one. He was devout as a boy. He studied the Talmud. He could have become a rabbi, and for a while it looked as though he might. But he had another gift, a quieter one, and it would matter far more than his faith. He had an ear. He spoke Arabic like the Egyptian on the next street, French like a schoolmaster, Hebrew, English, and he could slide between them without a seam showing. People who met him later would say the same thing again and again. that you could not tell, listening to him, where he was really from. He grew up in a world that was turning against him. Alexandria in the 1940s was a city of Jews and Greeks and Italians and Arabs, all layered on top of one another, and it had been like that for 100 years. But the ground was shifting. In 1948, the State of Israel was declared, and the Arab world went to war against it. And overnight, the Jews of Egypt, families who had lived there for centuries, became suspect in the only country they had ever known. In 1949, his father took most of the family and left for the new state of Israel. Eli stayed behind. He was finishing his studies in electronics at a university in Alexandria, and he had work to do. Work he did not tell his father about, because by then, Eli Cohen was already living a double life. He had joined the underground. He helped run an operation that smuggled Egyptian Jews out of the country and on toward Israel. Forged papers, safe houses, quiet boats. He took part in clandestine work for Israeli intelligence inside Egypt in the years when the net was tightening and a single mistake meant a cell and an interrogation room. In 1954, that net closed on others. A ring of Egyptian Jews recruited by Israeli intelligence was arrested for a botched sabotage campaign. The affair that would later be called by a man's name and remembered as a disaster. 2 of them were hanged. Cohen was questioned, he was watched, and somehow each time he talked his way back out into the street. After the Suez Crisis of 1956, Egypt began expelling its Jews in earnest, and the ground under Eli Cohen finally gave way. In 1957, he left the city of his birth, the sea, the languages, the only streets he knew, and sailed for Israel, to a small apartment and a family that had gone ahead of him, and a country that did not, at first, have any use for him at all. This is the part the legend skips. In Israel, Eli Cohen was nobody. He took a job as a filing clerk, then as an accountant for a department store chain. He applied to the intelligence services and he was turned down. They tested him and they sent him away. One assessor wrote that he was not suitable. He was a clerk with a gift no one wanted. In 1959, he married. Her name was Nadia, an Iraqi Jewish woman, gentle and young, and she knew nothing of who he had been in Alexandria. He told her he was an accountant. She believed him because it was true, and because the rest of it was buried. They lived a small life on the coast south of Tel Aviv, a modest flat, a salary that did not stretch far. He went to the office and came home, a quiet, polite man in a quiet street, and the neighbors thought nothing of him at all. He was not yet 35, and the great adventure of his life, the smuggling, the underground, the years of walking past Egyptian secret police with a secret in his pocket, was already behind him, and it seemed it would stay there. He was restless in a way Nadia could feel but could not name. A man with a gift, filing invoices, a racehorse pulling a cart. And then, around 1960, the men who had rejected Eli Cohen came back. Israeli military intelligence was building something new, a deep cover agent inside an Arab capital, a man who could vanish into the enemy and live there for years. They went through their files of rejected applicants. They found the clerk with the perfect ear, and this time they asked. They trained him for months. In a safe house, in secret, they took Eli Cohen apart and built someone else inside his skin. They taught him radio, how to transmit in Morse, fast, in burst, before the signal could be traced. They taught him secret writing, dead drops, codes hidden in ordinary letters, the placing of a flower pot on a balcony to mean one thing and its absence to mean another. They taught him to handle explosives and to read a military map, and they taught him, above all, the cover. His name would be Kamel Amin Thaabet, a Syrian born in Beirut whose family had emigrated to Argentina when he was a child. A wealthy import-export businessman, unmarried, devout, generous, homesick for a Syria he had never really lived in. Every detail was rehearsed until it was reflex. The dead uncle, the family business, the streets of a Buenos Aires he had not yet seen. In early 1961, Eli Cohen did not go to Syria. He went the long way around. He flew to Argentina. Buenos Aires held a large, wealthy community of Syrian expatriates, and Kamel Amin Thaabet needed to be born among them before he could go home. So Cohen arrived as a rich returning son, took a good apartment, joined the clubs, gave generously to the right causes, and let himself be seen. He read the Arabic newspaper of the émigré community. He went to their gatherings. He talked of his love for the homeland, and he listened. And there, in the Syrian circles of Buenos Aires, he met a man who would change everything. An Argentine-based journalist and propagandist with deep ties to the Syrian establishment, a fierce Arab nationalist who took to the charming patriotic millionaire at once and offered to introduce him to people back home. Through that circle, Cohen brushed up against Syrian military officers living abroad. Among them, by several accounts, a rising officer named Amin al-Hafiz, who would, within a few years, become the president of Syria. Sit with that for a moment. Before he had ever set foot in Damascus, the spy had already made a friend who was about to run the country. He stayed in Argentina for months, long enough that the legend grew roots, long enough that when people in Buenos Aires spoke of Kamel Amin Thaabet, they spoke of a man they had known for a while, a man whose generosity they could vouch for, whose patriotism they had heard with their own ears. That is the slow, patient art of deep cover. You do not arrive in the enemy's capital and ask it to trust you. You build a man it already trusts somewhere far away, and then you walk that man home. By the time he packed his bags for Syria, no one in the émigré world thought to ask Kamel a single hard question. He had references. He had history. He had a past they had watched him live. In early 1962, Kamel Amin Thaabet sailed home to a Syria he had never seen, carrying letters of introduction from the most respectable men of the exile community. He arrived not as a stranger to be checked, but as a returning patriot to be welcomed. He rented an apartment in one of the best districts of Damascus, and here the file underlines a single detail. The building stood within sight of the Syrian Army's General Staff headquarters. From his own balcony, the spy could watch the comings and goings of the men who ran the Syrian military. He moved fast. He threw parties. He spent money, Israeli money, a great deal of it, on the best food, the best drink, the most beautiful company. Officers came, politicians came, Ba'ath Party men came, in those years when the party was clawing its way to total power. They came because Kamel was generous and discreet and a patriot and good company, and because everyone important in Damascus seemed to know him already. And while they ate and drank and boasted, he listened. At night, the listening turned into work. In his apartment, he had a radio transmitter, hidden, and on a schedule he sent what he had learned, in fast bursts of Morse in the small hours, to a receiver hundreds of kilometers away in Israel. troop movements, weapons deals, the mood of the officer corps, the endless plotting of one faction against another in a government that changed by coup. He sent it by other roads too, letters in secret ink, goods shipped out with messages folded inside them, and he carried information in his head when he traveled, because Kamel Amin Thaabet, trusted patriot, was given a gift that no foreign spy should ever have received. They took him to the front. Syrian officers, proud of their defenses, drove their wealthy friend up to the Golan Heights, the high ground above the Sea of Galilee, the fortified ridge from which Syrian guns looked down on Israeli farms in the valley below. They showed him the bunkers, the trench lines, the gun positions. He walked among the fortifications that the entire Israeli army would one day need to break. And here the file pauses over a story that has been told 1,000 times, and that no one has ever fully proven. The story goes that Cohen, looking at the sun-baked positions, suggested to his hosts that they plant eucalyptus trees beside each one to give the soldiers shade. The trees were planted, and years later, when war came, those neat lines of trees marked every Syrian position for the Israeli gunners. Some who knew the case insist it happened. Others call it a legend that grew after his death. The truth has never been confirmed, and that uncertainty is its own kind of monument. What is not in doubt is how high he climbed. Kamel Amin Thaabet became a fixture of Damascus society. He was close to senior officers and senior Ba'ath officials. By some accounts, and this is one of the claims still argued over, he was floated, half seriously, as a candidate for a deputy ministry, a post near the Ministry of Defense itself. An Israeli spy, considered for high office, in the capital of a state sworn to destroy Israel. There was a night that should have ended it. The story, told by people close to the case, is that a guest in his apartment once wandered where he should not have and came close to the hidden transmitter, or that a sudden search of the building sent him scrambling to bury the evidence with minutes to spare. The details shift in the telling. What stays constant is the margin. Again and again, the gap between Eli Cohen and the gallows was the width of a closed door. A quick lie, a calm face held for one more second. He lived for 3 years on the right side of that margin. No one lives there forever. He should have been caught long before. There were warnings. His radio went out night after night on a schedule from the same district. Twice he traveled back to Israel to see Nadia and his children, slipping out of his own legend and back into his real life, and then returning to the mask. And each crossing was a knife edge. He grew tired. He grew careless about the timing of his transmissions. He sent for longer than he should have. The handlers, far away, worried that he was pushing too hard. He was. He had been living as another man for 3 years. He had a wife in one country who thought he was a businessman who traveled too much, and a circle of friends in another country who would cheer when he died. He was carrying both lives at once, and the weight of it was beginning to show in the smallest things, in how long he stayed on the air. And in Damascus, someone had finally begun to listen back. By the start of 1965, Syrian counterintelligence knew that someone was transmitting from the heart of the capital. The foreign embassies complained that a powerful clandestine signal was interfering with their own radios. The Syrians went looking for it. And they had help. By most accounts, Soviet experts, with modern radio direction-finding equipment far better than anything the Syrians had, were brought in to hunt the signal. They drove the streets with their gear. They cut power to districts of the city, block by block, to see when the mysterious transmissions stopped. They narrowed it down, street by street, building by building, until they were standing under the right window. On the 24th of January, 1965, in the early morning, Eli Cohen was at his transmitter, on the air to Israel. The door came in without warning. Syrian security men poured into the apartment and took him mid-message, the key still under his hand, the set still warm, the evidence impossible to deny. There was no story Kamel Amin Thaabet could tell that would explain the radio. What followed was weeks of interrogation, and it was not gentle. He was beaten. He was tortured. They wanted the network, the methods, the men in Israel who ran him, and the full account of everything he had sent. How much he gave them, and how much he held back, is one of the things the file cannot fully answer. They forced him, at one point, to send a message to Israel under their control, to keep the link open, to try to reel in more. His handlers, reading the words coming back, are said to have known almost at once that something was wrong. The rhythm of his sending had changed. The man on the other end was no longer free. They paraded him. Syrian television showed the country the face of the man who had eaten at the tables of its generals. The friends who had trusted Kamel Amin Thaabet now had to explain, in a state ruled by suspicion and the firing squad, how they had let an Israeli walk among them for 3 years. Some of those friendships would cost the men who offered them. A spy does not only destroy himself when he is caught, he takes down the people who liked him. The trial was a military tribunal, and its verdict was never in doubt. Syria put him before a court, charged him as an Israeli spy who had penetrated the highest circles of the state, and condemned the men who had befriended him to the public humiliation of having trusted him. The sentence was death. The world tried to stop it. The pleas came from everywhere, from governments, from lawyers, from religious leaders. Pope Paul VI was among those who appealed for mercy. Canada, France, Belgium. Voices in many capitals asked Syria to commute the sentence to prison. Israel offered money, prisoners, medicine, anything. Damascus refused all of it. They had caught the enemy inside the house, and they meant to show the world the body. In his last days, he was allowed to write. He wrote to Nadia. He told her to remarry, to think of the children, to live. He asked to be forgiven for the years of silence. The letter is short and plain, and it does not raise its voice. I beg you, my dear Nadia, not to spend your time in weeping for what is already past. Concentrate on yourself, looking forward to a better future. On the 18th of May, 1965, before dawn, they took him to Marja Square in the center of Damascus. A rabbi was permitted to be with him at the end, to pray with him. He said the prayers of a dying man. They pinned the sheet of paper with the death sentence to his clothing, and then they hanged him in front of the city, and they left his body on display for hours, and they filmed it, and they sent the pictures out across the Arab world as a triumph. He was 40 years old. In Israel, Nadia Cohen learned she was a widow from the radio, like everyone else. She was a young woman with 3 small children, the youngest a baby, and a husband who had told her he sold furniture and traveled for work. Only after his arrest did the full shape of his other life reach her. That the businessman who came and went had been one of the most important agents his country ever sent into the dark. She had married a clerk. She had buried a legend. And she had no grave to visit because Syria would not give her one. That is the cruelty that has outlived everything else in this case. After the hanging, Syria buried the body in secret and moved it more than once to keep it hidden. For 60 years, across war and ceasefire and the slow grinding of diplomacy, Israel has asked for the remains of Eli Cohen to be returned. For 60 years, Syria has refused. His widow grew old asking. His children grew up and had children of their own, all of them petitioning, year after year, for the right to bury their father. What he gave his country is harder to measure, and people argue about it still. 2 years after his death, in the War of 1967, Israel took the Golan Heights from Syria in a matter of days. The same heights where Kamel Amin Thaabet had walked among the bunkers with his arm around a Syrian officer. How much of that victory traced back to him, no one can say with certainty. The intelligence services have never laid the whole ledger on the table. But the belief that he made a difference up on that ridge has never faded, in Israel or in Syria. Nadia did not let him be forgotten, and she did not let the silence stand. For the rest of her life she campaigned, letters, petitions, meetings with prime ministers and presidents, appeals carried to anyone who might have leverage on Damascus, for the single thing she was denied at 40, a grave to stand beside. She raised the children he never saw grow. She told them who their father had really been. And every few years, another rumor would surface that the remains had been located, that a deal was close, that this time the body would come home. And every time it came to nothing. He became a national hero, streets named for him, a story taught to school children, films and books, and, decades on, a television series watched around the world. The clerk no agency wanted became, in death, the most famous spy his country ever produced. There is a bitter symmetry in that. The men who tested Eli Cohen and wrote that he was not suitable were wrong in a way that would echo for 60 years. He was more suitable than any of them. That was the problem. That was, in the end, what killed him. And still, the body never came home. In 2018, Israeli intelligence managed to recover a single object from Syria and bring it back to Nadia. His wristwatch, the one he had worn in Damascus, returned more than 50 years after the man who wore it was killed. A watch. After half a century, it was the closest she ever got to him again. So much of this case is still locked, and these are the questions that will not close. First, how was he really caught? The official story is the Soviet direction finders and the long hunt for his signal. But there have always been whispers of something simpler and uglier. A tip, a slip, a betrayal from inside. 60 years on, no one has produced the proof either way. Second, how high could he truly have gone? The claim that he was considered for a senior post near the Ministry of Defense has been repeated for decades and doubted for just as long. If it is true, it is one of the deepest penetrations in the history of espionage. If it is myth, someone built that myth on purpose. Which is it? Third, the eucalyptus trees on the Golan. Did an Israeli spy really help his country target the very fortifications his hosts proudly showed him with a piece of friendly advice about shade? Or is that the story we tell because it is too perfect to give up? The men who could confirm it are gone. Fourth, what did he actually send, and what did it change? The full record of his transmissions has never been published. We are asked to take the value of his work partly on faith. Until those cables are opened, the size of what he did remains an estimate, not a fact. Fifth, and this one is not a question, because Syria has answered it for 60 years with silence. They have his body still. They have moved it and hidden it and used it as a card to be played and never quite played. A man can be forgiven for his enemies killing him. It is the refusal to give him back, decade after decade, long after the war that produced him, that tells you what kind of wound this still is. Close the folder. A boy from Alexandria with a perfect ear. A clerk no one wanted. A man who became someone else so completely that the enemy almost made him a minister, and then hanged him in a public square and kept his bones. He left a widow who learned of his death from the radio, 3 children who grew up visiting an empty grave, and a country that turned his silence into a legend it is still telling. He gave them every secret he could carry. They gave him a watch back, 53 years too late. Case closed.